are you located in your dreams?
That's what
Because
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I know people say, well, dreams don't have space. Well, there's some kind of phenomenal space. I start losing my grip. Like, what do you mean by space? If dreams
Yeah.
don't have space, like what? I don't even know what you mean by space. If what you mean by space is something that I have no conscious awareness of, okay, fine. But what I have a conscious awareness of in my dreams, and I've had too many dreams where I like knew I was dreaming, and I was like, hey, what is that? There's extension there. There's
Yeah.
this thing's over here, and it's moving, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, where am I? Am I located in my dream? Well, maybe my avatar is, if I even have one. Sometimes I
Yeah.
have dreams, and it's like I'm just acquainted with what's there. I don't even know
Whoa.
if I have an avatar. You
Dude, you
know?
got some crazy dreams. I want to plug into
Yeah.
your dreams. This is cool. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. I'm your host, Parker Case. I don't know if I've said that yet, but man, I'm really excited for this episode. It's going to be really hard for me to do my introduction, but I have with me Dr. Josh Rasmussen for the second time. And we're going to be talking about his new book or his forthcoming book. Man, I got the early access to it. I feel very special today. It's called Who Are You Really? A Philosopher's Inquiry into the Nature and Origin of Persons. And I've been waiting for this for a while, thinking about it, chewing on it. I knew Josh has been working on this, so I'm just all sorts of jazzed. If you guys like this episode and you want to hear more from Josh, you can just YouTube him. He's all over the place. You can also check out our previous episode. It is episode 107 on the metaphysics of truth, going over his dissertation turned book, defending the correspondence theory of truth. It's another really, really good one. Dude blows my mind like 7 times, 8 times in there. But before we jump in, I do have to do my introduction. So I want to thank everyone on Patreon for making this podcast happen. I've said it a bunch, but I want to make this a full-time gig. I would love to like fly out to Josh and like bring a bunch of Pensées gear and stuff like that. But I need more patrons to make that happen. So thank you to everyone who is already supporting me on Patreon. And man, if you like this podcast, if it's your top 10, top 5, please consider becoming my Patreon patron. You can find the link in the description. You can also find a super thanks button down here. If you want to go above and beyond Patreon or just give me a one-time gift, buy me a cup of coffee, that would be huge. All that is super, super helpful. You can also find the merch store. We have tons of gear like this new shirt that I'm wearing. There's the Brain Stash logo, Parker's Pensées. All sorts of colors, all sorts of designs from my guy, Chasten Han, who's been just awesome. Huge godsend. This guy's awesome. Check out his stuff. You can also go to our Discord channel where we're having conversations all the time about the episodes. So check out the Discord channel, check out the Parker's Pensées Penseurs Facebook group, subscribe, leave a comment. These things are going to be like, this intro is going to be 15, 20 minutes if I don't cut it. So thank you for everyone supporting the podcast. If you like it, please like it, please subscribe, and share a comment because Josh is on YouTube. So be cool, but share some thoughts because this book is forthcoming. Maybe you can help him think through these ideas even more. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Josh, man, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you. This is awesome. Yeah, I love what you've been doing on your show. I've been seeing some of your interviews, including interviews on the topic of this book with high-level philosophers. And I told you before the show, I added you to the acknowledgments of the book because some of those interviews actually helped me to think through, okay, I want to add some lines here to the book. So yeah, I'm just grateful to be with you here. Yeah.
That's awesome. I will say I did check that right away because I heard you say, or you told me that, and I was like, dude, he actually did it. That's amazing. I'm actually
You're
in there.
in.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I can retire now. Josh, man, you are a metaphysician, and man, you like explore what metaphysicians should explore, and you take different topics. You go into truth and all different types of things. But how'd you get into studying persons and consciousness?
Mhm.
Usually, it seems like people get. I'm not trying to blast anyone, but people go so deep in one area that they
Yeah.
don't go more broadly. And you're like a metaphysician. You talk about all the metaphysics. So why consciousness and persons? How'd you get
Well,
there?
so yeah, that word metaphysics, it's sort of variable in meaning. I think sort of philosophers, we think of this as trying to get at the nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
In some contexts, it maybe doesn't quite have that meaning. It might have more associations with thinking about things where you can't really get to truth. There's more speculation, but one of my interests is in trying to understand things as deeply as possible. And so the nature of persons, it's interesting. I talk about this at the beginning of the book in my preface about how persons are a window into reality. I mean,
Mm.
you sort of look within and you find yourself thinking and feeling and wondering about how we got here. And then you can start wondering about the wondering. What is a wondering, Parker? What is that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, whatever it is, it seems to be some part of reality. And by thinking about the nature of the things within, we can start to see into the nature of reality. And one of the themes in the book is that we're sort of deeper in than I myself even anticipated. And many philosophers who come into this field of studying consciousness find this in their journey too. It's this isn't something that people are kind of starting with thinking, okay, here's the nature of reality. Here's how we have to think of things. It's more like, what is the nature of reality? And they're finding these pathways to seeing that we're kind of deeper in than we might have expected. So, and we'll probably talk more about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what I really like about the book is that you break it into these two parts: your nature and then your origin. And the origin question is so fascinating because it's like the origin question is what kind of world must we be in for us to be who we are? So you spend
Yeah,
all this time saying this is who we are, like you can't escape it, and we can even use some of those introspective and some of the tools of introspection and reason and even scientific method to say this is what you are. Now, what must be like undergirding that if you are who you are? And
yeah.
dude, I love that. It's such a cool method. Is that principled or could you have likewise done the other way? Could you have
Ah,
started with yeah,
yeah. Like start with sort of theories of origin, and
yeah,
then this is what you must be in order for those
right,
theories of origin to be true. Well, it's interesting because I think, in fact, this is exactly how sometimes philosophers come to views about the
yeah.
nature of persons. And I was talking with a philosopher at a conference a few years back, and he had a view about, well, he had the view that he himself didn't really exist. So he told me he himself didn't really exist. And then his argument for that, this is a great guy, great philosopher,
Sure.
fun conversation, and very interesting. But he argued from origin. So his argument was, well, in the beginning are the particles, and he didn't really see a way that particles could organize into a first person conscious being.
Yeah,
And he sort of took the line that if he existed, really existed, that he would be a kind of first person conscious reality. And we'll talk more about what that might mean. So he worked from a theory of origin to a theory of the nature of who he would be. Well, that he doesn't exist, but if he does exist, then this is what kind of reality it'd have to be. It'd have to be the kind of reality that could be explained in terms of third person physics, right?
right.
So I go the other way. I start with let's make some observations about consciousness. Let's go carefully. Let's not assume any sort of large scale theories, and let's see if we can kind of find ourselves getting some insight into the nature of our origin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And well, so man, I asked because I like that one better. And I've talked with so many of my friends who are dualists and they go in deep on introspection and stuff. And they say, look, I know that I'm in pain or not more surely than I know that like this chair exists over here. And so they convinced me on that, and I know a lot of people will poo-poo that, but I just think, like, that is the way to start because I can't it's really, really hard for me to doubt my existence. I don't think that I can, but, maybe I can ask you really quick, Josh. You think you can doubt that you exist?
I think you can doubt anything, and I
Okay.
just want to say right away, I think there's value in both approaches.
Yeah.
There's trade offs, I think, but I also sort of share kind of the spirit of what you're saying, which is that I think it's possible to have a clarity about your own existence that's even greater than the clarity of things, large scale theories of the world.
Yeah.
It's difficult. One of the things I do want to say kind of early in this conversation is that what I see, Rachel and I, we were having lunch together earlier today. We were talking about this kind of in preparation for this conversation. And one of the things that sort of came out in our conversation together was just that this is a very complex subject.
Yeah.
This subject brings the brightest minds from all areas of inquiry, from cognitive science, from neuroscience,
Mm.
from the philosophy of mind, from near death experience studies, from
Yeah.
just every single area that you can imagine. People are thinking about this, and I feel like there's been a lot of progress. But a lot of this progress, I feel like, has kind of been covered over by the storms of controversy, where people try to kind of represent one side versus another side. But what I'm seeing is that there's not just one side or another side. There's many different perspectives on a kind of emerging set of data that's coming through from very recent science that I've been reading, as well as what I would say is developments and analysis.
Mhm.
This is my area of philosophy. People sometimes think of philosophy as a kind of spinning the webs of speculation, and I appreciate the concern very much. I think we're liable to that, but one thing that I try to do is to think carefully about deductions. So if this is true, or if these observations are actual observations, what can we deduce from that?
Yeah.
And there have been theorems in consciousness studies that have been published that some of this is in the information theory of consciousness. Some of this is in my own work that I talk about in my book, and other theorems. And I think that, of course, those theorems always proceed from starting points, and people could question the starting points. But the point is that there are these deductions of analysis that are surprising, I think, to a lot of people. In fact, I think one of the deductions is a deduction from a certain view of fundamental reality to you don't exist.
Right.
And there's carefulness of that deduction. Not a lot of people see that,
Yeah.
how you can go from there to there, which assumptions lead to which outcomes. And so I think there's been progress on kind of two large fronts. One is the kind of empirical scientific studies giving us more and more observations, and then a kind of analysis of those studies. I think there's been progress on both fronts. And because these are big questions, people come to different views on this. But I think if we can really kind of see everybody as part of a team, we'll have the greatest chance to see the most together. So that's one of my goals in the book, is to try to draw out the most from the widest range of data.
Yeah, man, I love that, and I think it is. I'm so tempted to want to get into my little corner, and it's us versus them, but sometimes we really, really, really need them, and I love that you want to do that. You want to actively say, no, we need all the information. Let's get all these people working together, and some of these conclusions are going to hurt your theories, the theories that you came with. It might sting a little bit if you came with this theory, and that's okay. It's fair game for everyone. Everyone probably going to
Well,
get stung a
my
little
view
bit.
has been has been updated quite a bit over the years, and even in reading this book, it's been updated. And one of the things I was adding today in my book was a footnote about this view called illusionism, which adds to the elimination of a certain quality of consciousness, or what it's like to be you, or phenomenal consciousness, and adds to that sort of a theory about sort of why people are tempted to believe in consciousness if there isn't consciousness. And the idea is that it's an illusion. And one of the things that I did in my footnote was, instead of arguing against illusionism, I saw the value in illusionism, and I saw how it actually fits with my bigger project. And it took a little bit of work to see that. But once I saw that, I got very excited about that. I was like, oh, okay, this is great. The illusionists are helping us to think more carefully about sort of what it means to be aware of something, even to be aware of our own consciousness. And how could that be an illusion? And thinking carefully about that really helped me personally to update my own thinking about perception and how that can integrate with a larger view. So I think for me, it's like, if I actually decide to look for the value in all the different pieces, that's when I start to see more value. And so, yes, I do mark a specific path through the book, and I do reach a particular view. I think some views are true and some views are not true, right? I do think that's true. But I feel like I've been learning a lot, and so I think that there's many truths to see in this domain.
Yeah. Man, so Keith Frankish is going to be happy about that one, or maybe not happy, because you can subsume his view under yours.
I referenced to him on Twitter. I was like, check this footnote. Let me know if I'm missing something here, because I want my readers to feel like, even if I disagree with them, their views are well represented. They're going to feel good. Like, okay, that's my view.
Yeah. One thing. So I did notice all the people you're interacting with. I thought that was awesome. But I also noticed, I forgot what they're called, but when you take a quote and you start the chapter with it, for some kind of script, something, and I pulled one from T.H. Huxley about questioning whether conscious beings exist. And I took it not to be that like any conscious beings exist, but just like the wonder of being a conscious being, thinking about how it is that I'm conscious. And so he
Yeah.
says, how is it that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue? Is is just as unaccountable as the appearance of Jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp.
Hmm.
And it was like I was reading it on the elliptical today. I was like, that is amazing. Like, how is it that I have consciousness? It's just crazy. It's like Aladdin rubbing the lamp and the genie flies out of there. Um, it was so cool. So you formalize this and you say, when I think about what it might take to make a conscious being, I can feel pressure to doubt that any conscious beings could ever exist.
Hmm.
Here's a simple argument for that conclusion. If conscious beings can exist, then there is some possible explanation of their existence. There is not a possible explanation of the existence of conscious beings. Therefore, conscious beings cannot exist. I think two is what people are the second premise there. There's not a possible explanation of the existence of conscious beings. Can you motivate that one for us? Because once I saw your reasoning, it freaked me out. It was really good.
Well, in a way, the whole first part of the book is a slow motivation for the deep problems of consciousness from
Yeah.
many sides. Because it's not just even that there are feelings, it's all the things that are contained within our awareness, our own
Mm.
thoughts, our own sense of imagery. What is that? If you're having a dream, you're having images of mountains and trees, and it's like, but there's not actual mountains there, but there's something there.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a theory that actually in hallucination, like there's nothing there that you're aware of, but that can't be right because I can distinguish one dream from another. And the only way I can distinguish one dream from another is if there's something different between the dreams that I'm aware of.
Yeah. It'd be like there's differences between nothing. It's like nothing doesn't distinguish itself from nothing.
Right.
So it's got to be
Yeah.
something.
So the question then is, well, what is that? What is the sort of dream imagery? What is that? And you can analyze it in terms of, let's say, particles or something like this. But there are difficulties there because it seems like I have this kind of introspective access
Yeah.
to the imagery, but I don't have that same introspective access to particles in my brain. And now this is where analysis comes in because you might
Yeah.
think, all right, so what? Maybe it's just the same reality viewed in different ways. But if we just think very carefully about this, if X is the same as Y, I sometimes use the example of a coin. If the front side of a coin is the same as the back side of a coin, there's one coin, but if the front side is the same side as the back side, then whatever's true of X is true of Y.
Right.
But that means that if I am introspectively aware of X and X is Y, then I am in the very same way introspectively aware of Y.
Yeah.
But if I am aware of the front coin and not aware of the back coin, the back side, that's enough to verify a distinction there. So, that's the beginning of an analysis, and then there's responses and counter responses. But as you sort of zoom in on the different elements of consciousness, you start to see a deeper problem of explaining purely in terms of the sort of fundamental particles, how there could be thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And like I say, it's not just people trying to argue from consciousness for a certain view about fundamental reality.
Right.
Many philosophers are plagued by this sort of hard problem of how you explain consciousness. I quote a philosopher who makes the argument that there aren't thoughts anywhere in reality, not in your
Yeah.
own mind, nowhere, precisely because he doesn't think that we can analyze thinking and the aboutness of thinking and the structure, and we'll talk about the structure of thinking purely in terms of the vocabulary of physics. Now, not every philosopher takes that route, but there is a kind of argument there. And let me just say, I mean, I do get gripped by this puzzle. It's like I was talking with my wife Rachel about this, and we were both kind of like in this state of like, yeah, why is there anything? And if there's going to be something, why is there consciousness? And
Yeah.
we both kind of had this moment of like, like this reality just shouldn't be real. Like there should just be nothing. And if there's going to be something, there's not going to be us, real
Right.
conscious beings.
Right.
And so I'm very sincere in that opening argument. Like I do feel this sort of pressure. Like how could there be anything that actually has thoughts, feelings, emotions, a sense of self? Even if the self is an illusion, there's the sense of self. How can that exist? And there is almost like this magic, like rubbing a lamp and then magic pops out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And some people listening to this, they might think, well, maybe what Josh is really trying to do is he's trying to make an argument here for God. He
Mhm.
wants to say that the way to explain consciousness is because, in terms of this sort of supreme mind at the foundation of reality. No, the problem with appealing to God at this level is that just postpones the mystery, or actually maybe exacerbates the mystery, because now we want to know, how did God's consciousness exist? You say, well, it's just necessary. Well, that's kind of just like saying that this mysterious, puzzling thing that we don't understand how it could be there just had to be there. That doesn't
Right.
really answer the mystery. It kind of just like labels the mystery.
Yeah.
And so one of the goals in the book is really to understand at a deep level how there could be anything that has thoughts and feelings. How could that even exist in the
Yeah.
first place?
And I love that. I thought about that same point. I went through the same. I just read this and I was like, I read the argument and I was like, well, God, or either I'll say God or someone, my interlocutor, will say God. And then I thought the same thing. And it's like, well, God is conscious. It's like, well, he's necessarily conscious. That's what it means to be God. It's like, but why and how? And like, could there be a possible world where he's not? And then I want to bracket off like ontological type stuff, because then, okay, well, and I said there was a possible world where God's not conscious, and I just messed everything up, and Joe Schmidt comes in and wrecks my ship. No, I'm just saying it's really a crazy thing, and just like you said, I want the listener to really sit with that. That like, why isn't it just particles? Just why am I having feelings? I was like sweating on the elliptical, and I was like, I'm cutting weight because I'm doing jujitsu, and I was like, how come I'm feeling hungry? Why is there anything that feels hungry at all? And it's like, well, even if you go with God as a necessary mind, like he didn't feel hungry. So just the whole thing is really cool and complex. And I love that you start the book this way. And I want to motivate people, especially Christian theists, like step in and expand your mind a little bit, really think deeply about it. You don't have to like let go of all your convictions, but think about like what are we saying here? It's
Get
magical, man. It's so
curious
cool.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's just more wisdom, I think, that springs out of the geyser of curiosity. I mean, for me, when I think about just like particles moving around, there's sort of this construction problem, which we'll talk about. There's
Yeah.
different angles there of how you might construct thoughts and feelings or thinking things out of particles. But there's also a kind of like prediction problem, or a sort of a probability problem, where you wouldn't just sort of expect, without any sort of explanatory mechanism, that particles are going to sort of turn into feelings.
Right.
At least I wouldn't expect. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. That seems sort of bizarre in a way. And then if I say, well, feelings are just there at the base of reality, God feels. It's like, I'm like, what? Like, why are we in a reality that has feelings, Parker? That just
Right.
is very bizarre.
Right.
It's very
Right.
strange in a way.
Well, so
Yeah.
you broach this problem, and then you bring up three obstacles to progress. One is the mist of uncertainty. The second is widespread disagreement on the nature of consciousness, and then the third one is prior paradigms. I thought maybe we
Yeah.
could just touch on each of those. What do you mean by the mist of uncertainty?
So yeah, I mean, I think that it's difficult to sort of make heads or tails of theories of consciousness, especially when all the experts kind of disagree.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this feeling like, well, how could you really know anything? And I think this can actually inspire a healthy humility. You might think you have sort of an answer, but and this is related to the prior paradigms problem, actually, which is that I think sometimes people come to this topic with the prior paradigm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I talk with people, they have a very strong conviction about what science tells us about the nature of the mind. And the question is, well, does that paradigm about what science tell us actually match with our latest scientific studies? Or is there an analysis of what the studies are telling us that really makes the best sense
Yeah.
of that data? And then, yeah, from sort of religious or spiritual traditions, there are frameworks that can sometimes make it hard for people to sort of think with new eyes, or to look at the data with new eyes. And I think that's been, I think for me, one of the biggest and maybe the most fun parts of this project is just kind of like looking at the topics again with new eyes and just seeing,
Yeah.
okay, what can I see about these things? But I think that because there's a lot of controversy, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of disagreement, and a lot of different competing paradigms, I think that does create sort of a barrier for people to even look into this for themselves.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really try to do in the book is I try to empower the reader, or to really in a way show that the reader already has the powers, great powers, to see into things
Yeah.
for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's more than you might realize. We did this study. I had a student. We did this empirical study to
I saw
see if,
that. Yeah, that was
yeah,
amazing, dude. I love that you did that in Necessary Existence, I think, too. I love that
yeah,
you do
collect
studies. It's so
people's
cool.
beliefs. Yeah, so we did this, and we haven't yet published this, but we have some very interesting data
Yeah.
where we surveyed people and just kind of asked for their sort of impressions about premises in longer form arguments related to consciousness. And this is going to highlight again the value of analysis, because what happened was you have a lot of people. I think it was like most people, but for modesty, let me say a lot of people who reported premises that ended up contradicting their belief about the nature of themselves.
Yeah.
And we had arguments for the existence of a kind of like materialist vision of human persons, and then arguments against an exhaustively materialist picture of human persons.
Yeah.
And on both sides, people had uh, beliefs that they already kind of had, that when you tease those out, you put their own premises together and you just apply deduction to their own premises,
Hmm.
you get a conclusion that contradicts something else that reported in the study.
Right.
So that to me is very fascinating. I think it shows the value of analysis, but I think it also highlights the power that people have to kind of pay attention to some things that they already believe, and then
Yeah.
take some time to tease out what those things would imply,
Yeah.
and take some time to sort some of the things they already have access to, some observations they can already make for themselves. And that's what I try to do in the book, is try to show you actually have some powers to check some things within your own mind, your own thoughts and feelings. And we'll talk about this. And through careful checking, careful paying attention, and then using reason to make deductions, you can actually, I believe, see some very important things
Yeah.
about who you are. I'm actually quite confident that you can have knowledge. I think sometimes people get confused about the difference between something being unknown and something being uncontroversial.
Hmm.
And so I think there's a little bit of a barrier here. Is just because there's a lot of controversy doesn't mean that you can't personally come to know something.
Yeah.
An example I like to use that kind of I think helps to make this obvious is, it is actually controversial among philosophers whether it's true that 2 + 2 = 4. That's controversial. Okay?
Yeah.
It's controversial among philosophers whether that there are any numbers right between, let's say, 2 and 6, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that you can't personally come to think or to even know that is true. We mentioned it's controversial that people exist.
Yeah.
It's controversial that matter exists. It's controversial. Like everything's controversial in certain quarters, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean, and I mean, in among the sort of experts thinking about these things, there's controversy there, but it doesn't mean that you can't like know anything. And I think the way to get knowledge, and the way to have a certain confidence in your own knowledge, is to actually recognize some of the things that you can see directly for yourself. And that, I think, in a way means maybe like taking your authority back. I think sometimes we give our powers away to others. We
Yeah.
let other people think for us, and then we start getting confused. It's hard to sort of see things for ourselves, because other people are kind of telling us what to believe. But what I find is that if I can sort of take my power back and pay attention to like what's most clear to me, and separate the clear from the unclear, I'll begin to see, okay, it looks like I'm actually observing this over here. I could be wrong. I can still keep that sort of humility, willingness to be corrected, but it looks like I'm seeing some things here.
Yeah.
And that's the approach I take in the book. I really want the readers to feel empowered on their journey. They can disagree with me at every step of the way. That's good, because that means they're thinking for themselves. I invite that.
Yeah.
I want to show the powers they already have to test everything that I'm saying. And I want to point to those powers. I mean, in a way, I'm showing them something that they can see, I think, pretty easily. I think it's possible to see it, but sometimes people sort of need the permission to see some things that can be right before them. If
I
that
think
makes
that's right. I think that's a great word, permission there, and taking back your power, your authority.
Yeah.
All the epistemologists are going to say, what about disagreement literature? And like, well, relax, hold on,
That's
just
part
a
of it.
second. Yeah. But so you bring up these tools of inquiry that I thought would be cool just to introduce, and everyone should go buy the book for these. But you have introspection, reason, and the scientific method. And
Mhm.
I did have a little bit of a like a triggered moment when you were talking about reason, because I didn't have the permission to be like, yeah, the laws of logic, we can use that, because I've got the non-classical guys in my head, and I'm like, it's very
Mhm.
controversial nowadays. If
Mhm.
we're talking about the law of non-contradiction, so even what you said right there, it's like I have permission to like believe in
Well, you
classical
can
logic type
check,
stuff.
yeah, you can check that. I mean, if the law of non-contradiction doesn't seem to hold up to your own analysis, that's fine. You know?
Yeah, right,
I
right.
use that as an example
Yeah,
of something, but sure, I don't wanna be dogmatic about that. In fact, on
sure.
the contrary, that's the whole point is I wanna invite people to sort of consider. I mean, look, the arguments against the law of non-contradiction proceed from reason,
Right.
right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
they're using reasons, right?
yeah.
So, you don't wanna sort of cut the branch off that you're standing on.
So good.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you have introspection, reason, and the scientific method, which is cash out as testing hypothesis and making relevant observations. So like really, really easy tools to
yeah.
just go out and do your work. I actually have a journal where I just do this. I haven't written in it a bunch, but I do what you're saying, where I sit down somewhere, I make myself just think, and I go certain things like I really like bad guys in movies. Like Gaston was my hero growing up. Maybe I'm just like a sick jerk, but I thought about like, why do I like Gaston instead of the
Uh-huh.
Beast? And I thought through like, what's up with me? Why do I like these kind of characters? Um, and I did a lot of this. I used introspection and reason, and I
Mhm.
didn't use a whole ton of scientific method, but I like that, man. So when I think about what a philosopher should be, I think you're a really good example for the rest of us. I'm an aspiring philosopher. Um, of like being a little bit on like the woo woo side, like close approaching woo woo, being really like excited about life, but also being rigorous and being like, well, we're not just going to speculate and throw things out. We need to have the imagination and the reason too. So just want to
Yeah.
commend you for that,
The
man. I appreciate
creativity.
you being a light for the rest of us to do it like this.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, one of my goals, I really want people to feel empowered in their own search, and I think
Yeah.
that's something that, we can all relate to this feeling of being a little uncertain of what to think, and I think that one thing I try to do, and I try to do this because I notice times when I don't do this,
Mm.
and sometimes I just don't notice when I'm not doing this, but I'm trying to get better at this, is almost like releasing myself from feeling like I need to sort of show you this path that I'm so excited about,
Yeah.
and instead almost like helping others to see, you actually have so much power to see paths. Your unique experiences allow you to see lines along a path that are based on a unique life history, so that
Yeah.
you can actually get excited about some information that you're seeing that like nobody else is really seeing it, and we need your information. So I need your site. It's like what you said at the beginning. If people want to provide comments below about anything that they disagree with about anything we're saying, that's great because that serves me. That helps me see more things, and I really mean that most sincerely. I
Yeah.
think people underestimate their own powers to see things.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
I know you do, because I've heard, I think last time we talked, you'd mentioned about how you always bring up something related to truth, and your students kept saying like the same answer again and again. You're like, well, I should think about that more, because they're all saying it. And I
right.
it's like, yeah,
Against
you
the
do that.
philosophers, because I'm thinking, well, the philosophers aren't gonna think that what you're saying is very serious, right? And then
Right.
I'm like turning it over in my mind, like, oh, I think you have a point there. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Well, so you bring up this construction challenge, which I think is really, really fun and really good. It's the challenge of seeing how to construct conscious beings by any means. And at first, I think the construction problem, well, that's for the materialists or even like the emergentists. That's for them. But it's like the challenge of seeing how to construct conscious beings by any means.
yeah.
Can you help us to flesh that out for everyone?
Okay, so Parker, imagine you're having a dream,
Mm,
and imagine it's one of those dreams where I don't know if you can relate to this, where you realize you're dreaming. You know
yeah.
that you're dreaming.
Mhm.
Now you can take control. Now it's not like 100% control. Even when I know that I'm dreaming, I'll try to
Right.
fly. Sometimes it's a struggle, but usually I can have more control once I know I'm dreaming. So let's
Mhm.
imagine that I'm having this dream. I see my wife. Oh, I'm talking about your dream. I'm talking about my dream. Okay, so imagine you see somebody in your dream that you know and you like or whatever, and then you think to yourself, I know that's a dream character. But I think it'd be really cool if that dream character were real. And so you think, I want to turn that dream character into a real conscious being.
Mm,
Now, I've had dreams like this where I did see my wife in my dream and I knew I was dreaming, but it was like, it's like you kind of know you're dreaming, but part of you still like feels like you're not dreaming. So I was like
yeah.
telling my wife, I was like, okay, Rachel, you're not real. So you're not really gonna remember any of this. But like some part of me feels like I'm really telling her, like she's getting this information, right? You're not real. But now I'm gonna make you real. I'm gonna do something in my mind, in my consciousness, and I'm gonna transform this imaginary character into a real conscious self.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, Parker, but I can tell you, like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to make a conscious self. I mean, not just by thinking,
Yeah.
not just by wanting, and so I think, well, that does kind of raise this question, like, well, how do conscious selves come to be? I mean, if you say, well, there's this original mind and it can produce a conscious self, well, how does it do that? How can any mind produce another conscious being? How is that even possible in principle?
Yeah.
And this is like one of the most difficult, this is probably the most difficult question of the whole book.
Yeah.
So, that I prepare the reader for appreciating the challenge. And that is a hard question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when I said like the woo stuff, like I mean that in the best possible way, because I think there's like that's like the magic of philosophy that like
Yeah.
undergrads think that like, oh, I'm gonna think about like stoner thoughts. I'm gonna have, and then they lose that when they become philosophers. Some of them lose that when they become philosophers, and they're like all serious and embarrassed about stuff. But you have
Don't
this.
use the word woo. Philosophers hate being associated with woo, Parker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, I
That's right.
told you, I do exactly what you meant. It's that wonder, that feeling of creativity and being sort of on the edge to
Yeah.
see something new. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
so you every now and then you'll just drop in something, and I had to pull this quote because you said a mind is a realm of consciousness, and I was like, dang, and it hit me. I had to read it a couple times. A mind is a realm of consciousness, and I think that bolsters that problem of constructing consciousness, because if it's a realm, which it is, like a mind is a realm of consciousness, because I can close my mind, I can close my eyes and go to my mind, and I can construct things, or like you said in the
Mhm.
dream, it's
If
this
it's not an
whole.
illusion, right? If it's real, yeah.
Yeah, but,
We
like,
have to
yours is
respect every
different than
step there.
mine, because you can't make me into your dream. You can't bring me.
Absolutely.
I've
Yeah.
checked with people when I've dreamt about them. I'm like, "Did you have this dream last night?" And they're like, "No." And I never get it. I'm always hoping, like, maybe we had a shared dream.
Yeah.
But it's this realm of consciousness, and if
Yeah.
you think about it that way, the way you put it, it's like, how am I gonna create this whole realm of consciousness that's separate from mine? I can play in my own realm, but I can't make
Yeah.
another realm.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Or at least it's not clear how you can make another realm sort of in the current context that you're in.
Yeah.
Maybe there could be a possible power that you could have that would allow
Yeah.
you to make another realm. But evidently, I don't have that power. And
Yeah.
so then, how can there even be that power, is the
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, and some people you might comment right now, and they talk about kids or something like, "Well, you made another one that way." And it's like, "Yeah, but do you know how you did it? It's not like the lucid dream where you're making things like
Yeah.
it's this biological process, but what is happening? Where did that come from, you know?"
Mhm.
And then you get in like the problem of other minds and like, "How do I know it's not a philosophical zombie or something?" Right?
Yeah. This is so difficult to talk about because there's like two things going on at once here. So one thing is the nature of you. Like
Mm,
what is a conscious self? Like what is that?
yeah.
Is it even real? What is that? Is it even real? And then there's that construction problem. Like, well, how do you produce that? Like by any means, whether by another mind or by matter.
Yeah.
But the reason why I just kind of want to highlight that complexity, because even the idea that you produced your kids gets caught up into this complexity.
Mm,
What is it that you produced there? I mean, I had a newborn about a month ago.
yeah.
Cutest little thing. And what I see when I look at his body is a configuration, a geometric configuration or a spatial configuration, not unlike the spatial configurations that I seem to see when I'm dreaming.
Yeah.
Those spatial configurations are there, but those spatial configurations aren't themselves first person conscious beings.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you could have a dream character where the dream character maybe represents somebody else. I've had
Yeah.
dreams where I'm open to the idea that those dreams were from another intelligence. I'm open to that because of the specific information I got from the character.
Yeah.
Um, but the character, that visual spatial representation, is not the totality of a first person being,
Yeah.
at least according to certain steps on this path that
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to zoom into every step. But But if that's right, okay, so if the spatial properties, the spatial body, the spatial manifestation of my newborn is not the entirety of the conscious being, the conscious self, then merely having one body lead to another body doesn't by itself even verify the production of a new conscious being,
Yeah.
or explain how that's possible, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a kind of correlation, so we have evidence that when there are bodies that are animated in a certain way, that there's a conscious being there, right? But merely having evidence, and I think this is an important point, I think sometimes people skip past this, is that merely having evidence that there's conscious beings correlated with certain geometric formations doesn't thereby give you an explanation of how the conscious beings came to be in the first place.
Right.
Can you like change some sand and then by changing the sand produce a first person conscious being that has thoughts and feelings?
Right.
Not just acts like it does, but actually has that inner realm of consciousness. Is that even possible in principle? And I think that, there's a lot we could say about that question, but I think that just by making the distinction between the spatial aspect and the being itself, I think that can help us appreciate the challenge of the question.
Yeah.
It's a question with respect to mental materials. How does a mind produce another mind? And non-mental, mindless materials. How do mindless grains of sand turn into a storm that looks like a brain, and then out of that brain pops a self, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, I think this is part of the reason why many people say, no, there aren't any first person selves. It's making the argument from the origin to the nature, right?
Yeah.
The origin is a brain. We know that, but a brain can't all on its own produce a real conscious first person self, not in the way that we sort of maybe witness ourselves introspectively. Therefore, that's not really there.
Yeah.
Um, but then you could argue the other way. You could say, well, I am here. Consciousness, me. And so now either you say somehow, in a way we don't understand, the material produced the mental, or some other mind produced the mental. Or, well, I guess the or is you're stuck with this problem, right?
Yeah.
But I think focusing on the problem and allowing it to sort of bring to life your own curiosity is the way that you can get more wisdom.
Yeah.
That is the way to get more insight into how you can be constructed. And I mean, in the end, I do offer a model that goes through the constraints of science and reason,
Mhm.
and all the observations. And that's not an easy project to do that, to find that
Right.
path through the constraints. But I think there is a way through. Yeah.
Yeah. Y- the idea about I've heard you talk about, maybe with Goff, I've heard you talk about making a thought conscious, and it was really clear there. That's like, no, you have a conscious thought, but the thought itself isn't
There
conscious.
you go. Yeah.
But then this idea about a person in your dream is like kind of blowing my mind, because you could go the extreme and you can say there is no consciousness, or you could go the other extreme and say everything is conscious. Or you could go even deeper on that path and say, yeah, your dream characters are conscious, and
Mhm.
maybe you have a dream of your infant son, and he's actually talking to you, and it's like, you have more evidence, if you're just going with geometric shape, that
Yeah.
that dream baby is conscious. You have more evidence of that than the other one, the real baby in base reality, wherever we are.
More introspective evidence, maybe. Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying there. I love what you're saying, because it's pointing to this sort of materials problem. It's the
Yeah.
problem of like what materials can be conscious,
Yeah.
right? And I think it can be very clear that that certain materials can't be conscious. I mean, look, even if an image in a dream were conscious, what I would say is it's not strictly the image that's conscious. It's the image is sort of representing some conscious being.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. But I
Yeah.
mean, then I want to say something similar about spatial realities outside my dream,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
then this is going to get into the nature of spatial realities and the nature of matter, which I don't know if I want to enter that right here, but
Yeah.
just to point to, I mean, this is why people from all circles and many different fields are puzzling about these questions, because they're all sort of entangled with many different other pieces. But
Yeah.
I think we can get some clarity by zooming in on certain materials, like thoughts don't think. Okay.
Yeah.
Thoughts don't think.
Yeah.
Numbers don't think. Now, how do I know that? How do I know that? I mean, it's not just that thoughts don't display the characteristics of being thinkers themselves. Because watch this. Imagine you're in a video game that's full immersion, and it creates it stimulates your brain. Let's say it goes right into your brain, stimulates the visual experience, kind of like in the Matrix,
Sure.
of other characters. And imagine, I mean, this is good. This is good. Your listeners are going to get blown away by this, maybe. Okay, so imagine that you're playing this game and you come up to what looks like a brain. It displays all the spatial aspects of a brain.
Yeah.
Now, you could even imagine, just to kind of fill this out, that in this illusion, let's say, some parts of the illusion represent other parts of the illusion. So maybe there's a painting of a brain over on somebody's wall. So you say, oh, that's just a representation.
Yeah.
You know, you could even imagine falling asleep in this Matrix scenario and having a dream of a brain. You say, oh, that dream image is about a brain. Then you wake up, but you're still in the simulation, and you go back and you see this brain structure. Okay. Now, but this is all still imagery in your mind. Now, I think that it is possible to see that this material, this brain imagery, is the wrong kind of material to have its own thoughts and feelings, in the same way that one sees that thoughts and numbers don't have their thoughts and feelings. You see it by having insight into the nature of the thing. I'm not saying this is easy to see, but I think it is possible to concentrate on the nature of the thing, the nature of a number, and see that numbers don't think. You can concentrate on the nature of a visual image, and you see visual images don't think. You concentrate on the nature of a spatial reality, and spatial realities, whether in a dream or out in the world, outside of a dream, don't, in virtue of their spatial aspects alone, think.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, maybe you could have a spatial image that represents a thinking being, but it's not just in virtue of the spatial aspects that it would be thinking. Wrong category, wrong material.
Well, Josh, does that extend? So, without, I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead or anything, but if you're a thinking substance, what does this? You're saying, I believe you're saying, just in virtue of spatial extension, that says nothing about consciousness or not, or are you saying like spatial extension precludes the consciousness? Because then it would have implications for whether our thinking substance is extended in space or not. I know you said you didn't want to get into
It's
extension.
good. Yeah, no, because there's a number of distinct theses, and like, so some of these I like to separate them because some I think are like easier to verify than others, or some maybe I have more confidence in than others. And for everyone, obviously, people can disagree. But so one thesis here is that it's not merely in virtue of the spatial aspects of a thing that thing thinks.
Right.
Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing would be that the spatial aspects would preclude thinking.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to say that I'm less clear about that.
Sure.
And the reason why I'm less clear about that is because it could be that there's a certain kind of substance that could have both spatial aspects and thinking powers.
Yeah.
This is something that I've kind of toyed with for a long time, and I've become more doubtful of that. I think, just to be honest, like, I think just between us, listeners,
Right.
I think thinking about the sort of mental nature of spatial objects in my dreams, and some people say, well, that's mere representation, but thinking about the nature of representation has me thinking that if a spatial brain could think, then so could images in my dreams think. And I don't think images in my dream, like if an image were shaped like a brain and functioning like a brain, it could be thinking. And since I don't think that an image functioning like a brain in a dream could think, this leads me to doubt that any spatial structures could think, even if they're shaped like a brain. I do think brains and thinking are connected in deep ways, and we could talk about that and why that might be. But after all this, let me just say I don't have the sort of clearest feelings about this, and so and my thinking's sort of been in development on that.
Sure.
But what I feel like I am quite confident in, like just like very sure about, is that it's not merely in virtue of the spatial aspects of a dream image or a brain that a thing has that internal first-person experience of thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
It might be that it can have certain functions as if it's thinking or feeling in virtue of its spatial manipulations, But I would say that that's a different matter. And let me just be clear, that isn't to say that there aren't law-like connections between certain functional spatial aspects and certain thinking and feeling. It's just that the spatial aspects alone aren't doing the work. It would be the spatial aspects together with these laws, and then the deeper explanation is going to have to do with what explains the laws.
Yeah, and you show that. I mean, you go through eliminativism and behaviorism and type identity and
Token ID.
functionalisms and stuff
Yeah.
to show all that, which is really great. So again, look in the book. Yeah, I always wonder about extension and like spatial objects and thinking things, because like I think God is probably extended throughout all of creation. Through like the doctrine of immensity or something, but like he's not a spatial object, or he's spirit, you know.
Well,
So
is
like,
that spatial extension? I mean,
yeah,
how do you
right.
analyze that, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's
it
super
could
weird.
be, just reading some of what the quantum field theorists are saying. And this is not my area, but some of them, what
Sure.
they're saying is that it looks like the spatial realities are not fundamental. That in fact, spatial realities, Carlo Rovelli makes this argument. Spatial realities, he thinks, are projections of an underlying non-spatial reality,
Wow.
and he thinks it has informational aspects that sort of determine its spatial aspects in some way. And he kind of leaves open the metaphysics of how that
Yeah.
works. But if that's right, then it seems like, if God is a fundamental reality, right,
Mm.
and God is then prior to spatial reality, then God's immensity might not be analyzed in terms of sort of spatial immensity. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I always go with like the authorial analogy, like C.S. Lewis was present. He's immense in his novels,
Yeah.
but yet he's not like actually located there. I don't know.
Yeah, or
It's
even in your dreams. I think about this because, like, are you located in your dreams?
That's what
Because
I
I
don't know.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I know people say, "Well, dreams don't have space." Well, there's some kind of phenomenal space. I start losing my grip. Like, what do you mean by space? If dreams
Yeah.
don't have space, like, what? I don't even know what you mean by space. If what you mean by space is something that I have no conscious awareness of, okay, fine. But what I have a conscious awareness of in my dreams, and I've had too many dreams where I like knew I was dreaming, and I was like, "Hey, what is that?" There's extension there. There's
Yeah.
this thing's over here, and it's moving, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, where am I? Am I located in my dream? Well, maybe my avatar is, if I even have one. Sometimes I
Yeah.
have dreams and it's like I'm just acquainted with what's there. I don't even know if
Whoa.
I have an avatar,
Dude, you got some crazy dreams. I want to plug
Yeah.
into your dreams. This is cool.
If I'm having a dream, well, join me in my dreams. We can have a
Yeah.
shared dream.
That's right. That's right. You use this thing called a direct comparison test, and I don't know if that's original to you or not. Is that your thing?
Yeah.
You use that a lot, and it's really really helpful for. I mean, you use it like to cut through a lot of different things, like eliminativism. I believe you're using it here. You say um, you can tell by introspection that some of your feelings differ from others. For example, happiness differs from sadness. Premise 2, if some of your feelings differ from others, then you have some feelings. 3, therefore you have some feelings. And I feel like I think that you've been doing this as well with dream stuff, in dreams within dreams. And you go through thoughts and feelings, and you're using this direct comparison test, which is so simple to use. And it's such a cool tool that I'm really excited for people to start using this tool, man, because
I appreciate
you're
that.
cutting
Yes.
through all this deep stuff, but you're just
This is
saying,
one
let's
of the
compare them.
powers. This is
Yeah.
one of the untapped powers.
Yeah.
I can get very excited about this because I think people have so many powers that they just don't know that they have, or they're untapped, or they're too familiar, or they're not like recognized powers. It's like the recognized powers to know things are your five senses, right?
Mhm.
And then there's like this question, maybe you have this spooky sixth sense,
Yeah.
can you get knowledge by introspection? Can you get knowledge by, it's like, no. There's nothing spooky about your ability to see that true is not false.
Right.
There might be debates about what's true and what's false, but that being true is not one and the same thing as being false.
Yeah.
Right? Or being a square is not one and the same thing as being a triangle. Sometimes I've asked my students to kind of draw out their power to see distinction. How do you know that a square is not a triangle? How do you know that? Right? And then somebody will say, because a square has four sides, triangle has three sides. Okay, but wait, how do you know that four is not the same as three?
Right.
It's like, oh, it's because, and then if you get technical, well, four is the successor of the successor of the successor of like zero or whatever. It's got one more successor, but that just relocates the question back. At some level, you have this power to see distinction in a basic way.
Yeah.
And I believe the way this works is that if you're consciously aware of the items in question, then you can distinguish them. So if you're consciously aware of a feeling of happiness and a thought of two, then you can distinguish or compare the feeling of happiness with the thought of two and see that they're different.
Yeah.
You can compare them directly. So, and that's how this works. And then we can use this to get some information about the nature of consciousness. Because, for example, you can bring to your conscious awareness a feeling of happiness, and then you can compare that with, I like to use simple examples just to sort of illustrate the power, with a triangle, right? You can compare that. And you say, well, is the feeling of happiness, is what it's like to have the feeling of happiness, if you can be sort of aware of that aspect, that quality, is it the same as the triangular quality? Are they the same? And what I say is that if you can get them both in your awareness, you can just compare them directly and test whether they're the same by your own light. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fill in, the answer to this. You just test that. Now, some people listening to this or watching this, they might think, well, how do you know that you're really seeing two different things rather than one thing from two different angles?
Mm-hmm.
People love to bring up the water H2O example.
Sure.
Where, the idea is that you can drink some water, here's some water, and you don't realize that this is the same thing as H2O, the molecular structure H2O. And so it looks like by science, we do learn that water is H2O, but we can't sort of just figure this out by the direct comparison test.
Yeah.
You can't just compare them. In fact, if you did compare, you might think, the H2O molecule and the watery thing, they seem different.
Right.
And so direct comparison test fails. It leads to error. So how do you know that it hasn't failed in your analysis of consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I feel like I have to actually talk about this for people to feel confidence in the direct comparison test. Otherwise, they're always going to feel like I'm missing something. Like
it's too simple, too easy. Yeah, too armchairy or something.
Kind of naive. You're too quick to get to woo, Josh. We know you like woo. We know where you're going. And I mean, I don't know if this is like a quirk in my personality, but I it's almost like I like it if somebody has this resistance to a view, but then I just show them that it has to be true without identifying the roots of their resistance. But on a psychological level like that, it just doesn't work, right? So you want to think about the roots of the resistance. Okay?
Yeah.
So, so I have to at least display my awareness of at least one of these roots. It's not the only one, but the worry is that you could think that water is different from H2O because you are comparing them in your mind, but they're actually the same thing. And what we need is science to sort of help us figure that out. And in the same way, maybe what science does is it gives us this sort of knowledge of the nature of our feelings through studying the nature of the brain. So you discover, there's this neurological activity over here, and it's corresponding with this person having a feeling. It happens every time. And well, that makes sense if the feeling just is that neurological structure. The neurological structure is this sort of H2O of the feeling. It's the deep nature of the feeling, right? So, so what do I have to say about that? Well, here I just want to make a distinction, which is that when you're using the direct comparison test for it to be successful, like when you compare, let's say, a feeling of happiness with the color blue or the thought that 2 + 2 = 4, when you compare those things, what's going on there is you have those items in your direct conscious awareness.
Yeah.
It works when they're in your direct conscious awareness. When it comes to H2O and water, I don't have direct conscious awareness of the molecular structure. And now you might think, well, don't you have direct conscious awareness of the water? Well, we have to be careful here. I do have direct conscious awareness of the watery experience, okay, or of maybe some macroscopic properties that are determined by the microscopic molecular structure. But I don't have the direct conscious awareness of H2O. In fact, if I did have direct conscious awareness of H2O, then I wouldn't need that sort of scientific empirical investigation to give me that insight into the deep structure. I could just tell you right away, I have conscious awareness of it. And so the direct comparison test, it only works, you can only apply it when you have conscious awareness of the items in question. But here's a nice little bonus. If you have conscious awareness of something and you don't have conscious awareness of something else, then you can use a different test, which is not direct comparison, it's just a deduction, which is that This goes back to the coin example. If the front side of the coin is the same as the back side of the coin, then if I have awareness of the front side, I thereby have awareness of the back side.
Mhm.
But if I don't have awareness of both sides,
Yes.
that's enough to
Yes.
verify that they're different. So the
Yes.
way that I think about this is, let's go to an example. I think about my feeling of happiness. So I have this feeling right now. I'm content talking with you, kind of excited. I'm aware of these feelings, and they're within my introspective conscious awareness. Now, I don't have that same introspective conscious awareness of the molecular structure of my brain right now, or the functioning of my brain. I don't recognize that awareness. I don't have that awareness.
Mhm.
I'm actually aware that I don't have that awareness. And we could talk more about the conscious impact of awareness. If I have awareness, it has conscious impact so that I can be aware of my awareness.
Yeah.
So I'm not aware of my
That's
awareness
good.
of the molecular structure. And so what this means is that now by deduction, I can verify there has to be something different. Even while the molecular structure is deeply connected with my consciousness, they're not one and the same side of me. They're not one and the same aspect. There's
Yeah.
kind of a dual aspect there. And also I want to say, I think that I actually do have direct conscious awareness of some aspects of, let me try it like this. Well, let's say that my brain has some spatial aspects, like it has some shapes in there. Well, I do have dreams where I think that I can be consciously aware of some shapes. And then I think that I can compare those shapes with feelings.
Hmm.
Now, some people listening to this, might say, well, those aren't shapes, those are representations of shapes. It's like, okay, well, then if that's your analysis of what those are, then we go back to, they have to be different because they're not in my awareness.
Right.
But I'm happy to call them shapes. I mean, I think
Okay.
it's just a vocabulary issue.
Yeah.
You know, we call them schmapes or shapes.
Yeah. Yeah. Shape star or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but whatever they are, I can compare those things, those phenomenal spatial things, and then distinguish them from my feelings. And
Mhm.
and this may sound sort of like basic, but it has such far-reaching implications about who we are and where we came from. This is why there is such a range of views about the nature of consciousness, including the view that there is no consciousness, or the view that the consciousness reduces to and is analyzed in terms of the material.
Yeah.
Because if we can verify by direct comparison that there's more to you than the mindless pattern of particles, well, then this opens up a big door to seeing into who you are. And it has huge ramifications. Going back to that problem of construction, how could you even exist? It
Yeah.
exacerbates that problem, but then helps us to kind of shave off theories that wouldn't account for your consciousness,
Yeah.
if your consciousness really is real and not reducible to the mindless matter. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
It totally doesn't. And one of the theories shaved off is type. What is it called?
Just
Type.
type
There's
identity.
Yeah, type identity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I was thinking like Graham Oppy. I was surprised to learn recently that he was a type theorist.
I saw that.
Yeah,
That was,
before I
let
had
me
him
just say,
on.
that was very helpful. Yeah, go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
no, I didn't know that beforehand. Before I set up this conversation, I knew that he argued against like J.P. Moreland's dualism, and so I was like, let's set up this conversation. And then I was like, well, what does Oppy think? And I saw
Yeah.
identity theory, and I was like, wow, type identity theory, and I was like, wow, that is pretty wild. And I still don't think I understand what he meant by like scales and stuff like that. At one point, it kind of sounded like he was an emergentist, and I don't mean that to say like he was muddled. Yeah, I was probably muddled in that because he's super sharp.
Well, he's very
But
clear-minded.
yeah,
Can I jump in on this?
please,
Because
please jump in,
that
please.
conversation you had with Abby was very helpful for me, because
Okay.
I've had conversations with him before about his type identity theory. And I mean, if there's anything that seems clear to me, it's that there's some distinction between consciousness and patterns of particles.
Right. Right.
That seems very clear. But he helped me realize that his difference is actually, I'm pretty sure it's merely verbal. And
Okay.
here's why. So these are terms of art. One of the terms of art here is what you mean by physical property.
Mhm.
So Oppy's type identity is that conscious properties are identical with physical properties. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, John Searle, he's sort of famous for arguing against, functionalist analyses of consciousness.
Mhm.
And so some people have said, well, you're a property dualist then, Searle. And so he's got this article called Why I'm Not a Property Dualist. I, no disrespect to Searle at all. I hold him in the highest regard, but I was not convinced by his argument that he himself is not a property dualist.
Right.
Well, it's just a vocabulary issue, because I think what's going on here is that the way that Searle is defining physical, and I got this from Oppie, that I think his notion of physical is just broad enough to include these subjective, qualitative aspects of conscious experience.
Yeah.
I think his view allows for that possibility from everything that he said. I don't know if he would necessarily follow that path there, but it sounded like he was going to allow for that, because he was talking with Mike Huemer, and Mike Huemer was drawing out, the sort of phenomenal aspects of consciousness. And I think that what Oppie was wanting to say is that those things really are real. And the difficulty, though, is that they can have a functional impact in a brain, and so you can think of them functionally.
Yeah.
The functional impact is actually a aspect of the aspect. It's a functional aspect of the aspect.
Right.
Yeah. So
But it's not the thing. It's
Yeah. You got it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so good. I only know that because Brandon Rickabaugh just hammered me on that just for like a whole year, and he's be like, "Well, functionalism it's not an analysis," and I'm like, "Dang it, okay, fine." So he finally got me on that. That's yeah. So okay. So going all the way back, I like using pain states because that's always in the literature talking about C fibers and stuff. And you actually you call this mental state of pain, you call it painy, or let's call it painy.
Yeah.
So painy isn't C fiber firing, because you can have this direct awareness of painy, but not know. And actually, it's a lot of people have told me it's probably not C fibers firing. That's pain.
Yeah.
And that even like bolsters the argument where it's like, I don't know what's going on in here, but I do know I'm in pain.
Yeah, not directly. You don't know it directly. I mean, you can maybe know it indirectly, right?
Sure. Yeah. But well, I don't. I'm speaking for myself. I straight up just don't know. What if someone pushed back on the water H2O argument again, and said like, well, look, I have this direct awareness of this watery thing that's analogous to painy, but I don't have awareness of the structure, so therefore they're two different things, just like painy is not fiber firing. I think I know what you're going to say, but I just want to.
Yeah. So I think what you have direct conscious awareness is the sort of watery experiences, or maybe some macro properties of water, but you're not consciously directly aware of the water. In fact, it's interesting because that term water, it's maybe a bit ambiguous. One way you could use the term water is to say water just means whatever it is that's giving me this watery experience.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's opaque in the sense that you haven't like identified what it is. Just the word water just means whatever it is. It's like, I imagine this door where somebody's in the closet and we say, let's let George be the name of whatever it is, whoever it is that's in the closet. We don't know who it is, right? We open the door. It's Rachel, right? Hi, George, Okay. So I think if you use the term water in that way, it's an opaque term.
Yeah.
Kripke talks about this because he makes the point that the way that you even understand the meaning of opaque terms is by their experience in your own consciousness. So you can make a distinction between the thing that you're referring to opaquely and the thing that you're experiencing. Like, so for example, go back to the door analogy. Well, I have an experience with a door and with my referring to the door. So it's like, George is whoever's in the door. Okay. Well, I don't know who's in the door yet, but I do know my experience of the door. Well, the experience of the door, that's in consciousness. That's not in the door.
Yeah.
Same thing with water. Like my experience of water, that's in consciousness. Or maybe there's macroscopic properties of water that aren't actually molecular. That's a debate we could have. But
yeah.
But what I'm consciously aware of is not the molecular structure. I don't have that conscious awareness of that. And so that's enough to verify that whatever I do have conscious awareness of, my feelings, my thoughts, the watery effects in my consciousness, those have to be different.
Yeah.
That's how I would think about that.
That's good. Do you just to be clear, is there any is mediation doing anything there? Like the water is still mediated through our senses. I'm being appeared to waterly, but I'm not really like appeared to painly. I just am directly aware that I'm in pain or not.
That's a very, very sharp question. And what I would do is I would give an analysis along two different paths. So,
Okay.
so right here, I was trying to kind of efficiently describe the scenario without dividing and conquering. But
Sorry.
your question is really wonderful because it draws out the role of perception, right? So because one theory of perception would say that you're not really ever even directly aware of anything external. You're only aware of it sort of as it appears to you.
Right.
Right. This is maybe an indirect awareness of the world. Another idea is that you are directly aware of the world, the external world.
Mhm.
And so now, if we take the indirect awareness model, then that I'm only aware of water like as it appears to me, and what I'm directly aware of are the appearances,
Yeah.
the experience. Well, then right away we can see that the appearance of water is not the same thing as the water that causes that appearance. Those
Right.
are different.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So then, but the appearance is a real bit of consciousness, right? And so that's
Yeah.
something that I can then compare with things like molecular structures that are outside of my direct awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the appearance is in my direct awareness. That's part of consciousness. If we take instead a direct realist analysis of perception, right? Then the idea is that I'm directly aware of some external properties of water, and so then I would just wonder, well, which external properties of water am I directly aware of? If I'm directly consciously aware of the molecular structure of the water, then it seems like I would be able to just say instantly, what the molecular structure is just by I'm just aware of it, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
But I don't have that kind of awareness. It looks like maybe on this sort of direct realism externalist theory that what I would be directly aware of would be maybe some macroscopic properties.
Yeah.
And in here, distinctions increase the resolution of our analysis because we could say maybe those macroscopic properties are in some ways composed of microscopic properties, or maybe
Yep.
the macroscopic reality is composed of microscopic realities. So you have a kind of part whole relationship.
Mhm.
But still, the point is it's not identity.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm so glad that we got to this point because a lot of people have conflated part whole relations with identity relations.
Right.
And so they're saying, well, Josh, like there could still be a kind of composition of your thought in terms of molecules. And it's like, okay, at this level of analysis, we can leave that open. Maybe there are other ways to check that. I have my mindful thoughts theorem we could talk about.
Mhm.
But yeah, as far as the direct comparison test goes, maybe the thoughts, maybe the structure of thoughts, maybe the aboutness of a thought, the first person aspects of thoughts are composed of micro aspects. That's fine.
Sure.
Still
Yeah.
not identical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that is the case, then we would have to go back to and you do deal with like weak and strong emergence because then we'd have to tell a story of like, well, if these are structured by the micro particles or something, like
Yeah.
why is it that they emerge or whatever? Okay, well now
Yeah, yeah,
it's just
absolutely
it's
right. So the
further on.
direct,
Yeah.
so the direct comparison test answers some things, I think,
Right.
but
Right.
doesn't answer everything.
Yeah.
But then there are other tests to examine those other things,
Yeah.
to investigate those other things.
I,
Absolutely.
I all,
Yeah.
all that to say, man, I really like the direct comparison test because you're saying, look, I have these things in my awareness, and you don't have to go in for like Husserl's like eidetic intuitions or any kind of like deep language that would be really hard to grasp.
Yeah.
It's just this is a direct comparison test, and here's all the things you get to do with it. So
Yeah.
it's just fun, man. It was really
Well,
eye opening
and
to me.
I make the argument that this is pre-intuition. So
Yeah.
Papineau, he's sort of famous for defending the type identity theory or some kind of identity theory, and he talks about this intuition of distinction. And so he's one of the best, I think, in representing the criticisms of his view very articulately, very charitably. It's like he understands so why somebody might think that there's something different about a feeling and
Yeah.
a neurological state. But he says there's a kind of intuition of distinction. And what I want to say is no, the intuition is not your basis for seeing that for thinking that there's a distinction there. The intuition comes later. It's actually, I think what's happening is that let me use a less no, this is an uncontroversial example. I don't know anybody who would be against this, that being true is distinct from being false. Those aren't the same property. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, now that I've stated this theory, there's going to be somebody who's going to debate this, right?
Yeah, I knew it. Yeah.
Right. But um, But I think what happens here is not that I have this intuition that being true is distinct from being false, and then I think, my intuition is reliable, so I'll believe that intuition, and now I believe true is different from false. No. I think what's happening is I have just a direct, conscious acquaintance with true and false in my mind. There's examples of true things and false things that I've had. I guess I'm going by memory now,
Sure.
and then I can just see the difference. And then the intuition is just what it's like consciously to tend to think that something's true. It's not necessarily the basis. It could be, but I mean, I don't think in this case it's the basis. I think you just see the distinction. And then once you have that sight, then you can use that sight, that same power to see distinctions. And you can investigate all sorts of things about your nature by looking
Yeah.
within and checking. Yeah.
It is such a basic thing, but it again, I think back to our last conversation when we are talking about truth and how we can have true thoughts and how magical that is and how
Yeah.
privileged we are. Like being able to do these kind of things is we're in a really privileged place. Even though you're like, yeah, making distinctions, dude. Of course, children can make distinctions. Yeah, but what kind of animal? What kind of thing
Yeah.
are we that we can make distinctions?
Yeah.
It's pretty wild that we just have that ability. And I think you're right. I think it is, preconceptual, or whatever. Like we just have this ability. We have this power to do that.
I think
So
we
cool.
take for granted the familiar things.
Yeah.
It's familiar that we can make distinctions, but it's actually a very special power that we have.
Yeah.
And the fact that reality has given rise to the power to see that one thing is different from another, that's already magical, right? I mean, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so there's a couple of things that you when you're analyzing thoughts, you talk about intentionality, and we've talked about that on the show. You do a great job there. You talk about truth and logical connections, but you talked about structure, and I got all excited about this because last time I had you on, we talked about structured propositions, and this is just like I don't know. It's not an analog. Maybe it's an analog. It's like propositions over here and they're structured, and so thoughts are structured. So lay that out for us, man. The structure of thoughts.
So in that section, I'm talking about these aspects of thoughts that you can witness through introspection, and you need the light of introspection to see these aspects
Yeah.
directly. I mean, you'll never get there just looking at brains. So one of the aspects is that a thought can be about something,
Mhm.
and we talked about that. Another aspect is that a thought can contain content that's true or content that's false. Like the thought that snow is white, contains content that's true. But there's this other aspect that it's again one of those things that's so familiar, but it's like so profound that this
Yeah.
exists. It's structure. It's the order of things. So, a way to illustrate this is I talk about the thought that the cat is on the mat, and then the thought that the mat is on the cat.
Mhm.
Now, both of those thoughts have the same conceptual elements: the concept of a cat, the concept of a mat, the concept of on. But those thoughts are the same thought. The thought that the cat is on the mat and the thought that the mat is on the cat, those are manifestly different thoughts.
Yeah.
How can they be different, Parker, if they have the same conceptual elements?
Yeah.
Right? Well, what makes them different, and I think you just see this, you consciously see this in your mind, they have a different structure. The structure is the word that I use for the order of the elements. It's the way the elements are arranged.
Yeah.
So cat on mat, mat on cat. And by the way, these elements are not the cat and the mat, right? These are conceptual elements.
Mhm.
These aren't chunks of matter. This isn't
You don't have a cat in
part
your
of
brain.
you
Yeah.
don't have a cat in your brain. And when you're looking at the thought, again, you're not even looking at axons or anything like that. That's not what you're witnessing consciously.
Right.
It's a structure there that is purely conceptual. It's real though. It's
Yeah.
absolutely real. And I also make the point that this structure is bedrock to logic and scientific reasoning.
Mhm.
Because sometimes I think in our culture there's this kind of authority given to science because of the wonderful things that scientists have helped us to see and help us to create. And sometimes there's maybe a perceived conflict between the sort of powers and results of science and some of these things I'm trying to point to within consciousness that aren't just purely analyzed in terms of spatial brains. But what I want to say here is that not only isn't there a conflict, but that the structure, this conceptual structure, which is not a material structure in the brain, is seeing this structure is bedrock to seeing logic itself.
Yeah.
because logic itself proceeds from deriving logical relations between contents, these structured contents of thoughts. And the logical relations are themselves macro structures built out of smaller structures. And you can't do science unless you can make predictions from your observations to test your hypotheses.
Yeah.
But to make predictions requires making deductions through logical lines. And you see
Mhm.
these logical lines in the structures of thoughts. And so it's just, I don't know, I get very excited about this because these are sort of bedrock metaphysical pieces
Yeah.
of reality that allow science to take place. And if we can understand these things clearly through increasing the resolution of our analysis by paying attention to what's in our own minds, then I think we're more powerful at seeing even just the nature of our minds, the nature of the things that might be familiar, but we don't see just how profound they are,
Yeah.
these conceptual structures. Yeah.
I've heard like some of the phenomenologists following Husserl, like Dallas Willard, they'll talk about the logical connections, and how science can't account for them, and how they need
Yeah.
to, so science can't oust philosophy. And so I've been aware of that for a while. I've been excited about that. I love that, but it's even cooler that you go a step deeper into the structure of thoughts,
Yeah.
and again, it's bordering on like the popular level idealists who are like, if you understand your mind, you can understand the world. And you're like, yes, but not the way you guys are doing it. Like, no, yes, but no. Yes, thought can open up the world to you, and just like analyzing your thought this way,
Yeah.
do it that way. And maybe I don't want to be too uncharitable to any of the popular idealists or anything,
Yeah.
but just saying, like, just because you're saying the same thing doesn't mean you're doing it in the same way. And
I hear you. Yeah.
it's just so cool to go at like thought, because I have those in here, or in not in here, but in my mind,
Yeah.
and I can understand the nature of the world because I have those.
Yeah. It's so foundational. And I think this shows how different people kind of looking at this topic from different angles can come together. And I know this is kind of a theme for me, but there's not this kind of conflict between looking within and seeing these structures of your thought, these conceptual structures, and then looking without or into brains, let's say,
Yeah.
and then trying to figure out, okay, how are the arrangements of molecules related to these conceptual arrangements? And there are deep, intimate relations there, and we can even talk more about that.
Yeah.
But those aren't in conflict at all. I mean, they can go together because we have tools to know both. We can use
Yeah.
all of our tools together.
Yeah. I love that. um I, I wanted to see if we could broach at least one, but maybe a couple of the counting arguments that, I
Okay.
mean, each one could be its own podcast. Maybe could you
Absolutely. Yeah.
give us like a broad overview, and then maybe talk about the mindless noise argument?
So this is hard for me. It's one of those things where it's difficult for me to take this kind of argument and break it down. I'll do
Yeah,
my best here to
sure.
give kind of just a taste for it.
Yeah.
Andrew Bailey and I, we have a publication called How to Build a Thought,
Mhm.
and we have a version of a counting argument. It's different in certain respects from the ones I give in the book, but it's very technical, symbolized. I think it's like more than 30 steps,
Wow.
and it's been reviewed by different logicians to sort of check it and get all the pieces right. It's a very technical argument.
Mhm.
But the seed idea is an idea that came to me when I was just one morning having some breakfast. And I just had this picture in my mind of these material landscapes, mountains. And then overlaying the material landscapes was a kind of conceptual landscape or a structure of concepts.
Hmm.
And then I began to wonder about the ways in which the conceptual structures can vary through logical relations. So, for example, you could have the thought that snow is white. Then you can have the thought that uh, white is snow. Okay, two different thoughts.
Mhm.
And then you can have like this or relation, and you can like combine those thoughts. You can have this more complex thought of snow is white or white is snow. And it's like now that more complex thought also has structure with the or relation in there.
Yep.
And this is a different sort of structure than the structure of the material forms, like the mountains, the let's say the spatial structures of the mountains. And so I began to wonder, like, is there a way to show that there are more conceptual types of arrangements than spatial types of arrangements that would be like logically conceivable? And
Mhm.
immediately I understood that there's going to be an infinite on both sides, because there's infinitely many different ways to reconfigure spatial things, and there's infinitely many ways to reconfigure conceptual things. One way to think about this is, for any kind of spatial thing, there could be a conceptual thing about the spatial thing,
Yeah.
or a conceptual thing that represents that spatial thing. It has this sort of conceptual parts, and so you have at least as many conceptual things as spatial things. And so let's say both are infinite. But I also understood from Cantor. Cantor helped us to understand infinities, and he's got this famous diagonal argument for why some infinities are bigger than other infinities.
So
Not
good.
going to work through the argument here, but
Yeah.
but the idea is that you can show that there are some lists where for every member of the list you can find a member on another list, but you can't go the other way. And so, like, if you take the list of all the decimal numbers and then you list of all the whole numbers, for every whole number you can find a decimal number over here, but you can't also find for every decimal number a different whole number. You're gonna have to do repeats, and there's a technical way of showing this. But what this shows is that these lists can't be like the same in cardinality or the same like size, we could say.
Yeah.
And so I wondered, well, could there be a similar argument that the list of all the spatial configurations is a different size than the list of all the conceptual configurations generated by these logical links? It's like the spatial considerations are generated by like spatial links, and then the conceptual configurations can be generated by logical links. You can add or to more and more thoughts, get more and more complex thoughts. Now, let me just be clear. I wasn't assuming at the start of the argument that conceptual links are different from spatial links, or that or isn't just a fancy function of brain particles. I wasn't assuming that. In fact, my whole point was to see if this kind of reconfiguration argument or counting argument could give us a reason to think that they're different. And so what I do, and I draw this out in the book better than I do in any of my publications. I've got 3 publications on this. I actually have a new argument in the book that draws out something here. But what I try to do is show how you can see through introspection these different ways of reconfiguring concepts without assuming the nature of the concepts. So I want to just point this out here because, for example, I think people would already agree that you can see with introspection that feeling happy is different than feeling sad, or that a thought that 2 + 2 = 4 is different than a thought that 2 + 2 = 6. You can see that by introspection without first checking your brain and seeing which molecules those things are, even if you're an identity theorist, right? So even if you're an identity theorist and you think that those thoughts are identical to certain brain patterns, you can still distinguish those thoughts from each other, even while you're holding on to your identity theory, if that makes sense. So I'm not assuming identity theory is not true. And so then what I do is I just use Cantor's theorem together with the sort of principle of recombination of conceptual things to lead to this conclusion that if all the steps are right, that there are more ways of reconfiguring mental space, let's say, or conceptual space than physical space or material space. And so I have the shapes argument, but then I extend the reasoning to brain states and to other states, and I show the same pattern, and that actually the result of the whole thing is what I call the mindful thoughts theorem, which is that the basis of mentality or thoughts can't just be determined by different mindless configurations, that you actually need mind. You need some kind of mind that's able to generate these thoughts. You can't just get patterns of mindless bits that determine each thought. There's too many types of thoughts. This is my intuitive sketch. I can't give you all the pieces intuitively. I don't know. I'm not that skilled, but I sense on an intuitive level what the sort of project is there. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to broach it because someone will be inspired by this. Someone will go look that up, and and this could be, they'll take your thing even further, whatever. They'll try to argue against it, or whatever. So I'm really glad to just be able to broach. So many things are so hard to talk about on a podcast because you just need to see it written out.
And there's more to explore. And I'm glad that you bring that up, because I know for myself, people will say things on their podcast and then they'll sow a seed and I'll kind of work on that. So there's more here. I think of this as kind of like a tree that can sprout more and more branches to explore. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Man, it's so good. Uh, okay. I wanna respect your time here. Got just a couple more. So you talk about the mind to body and then the body to mind, and it's like the
Yeah.
interaction problem.
Yeah.
Man, you seem so confident in this, and it freaks me out. Help me out. Like, can we solve this, or do we just make it more reasonable
Mhm.
to think that we are a thinking substance? That like what? Yeah, help me think through the interaction problem.
Yeah. So I think maybe what I'm confident about is first that there is a problem.
Yeah, yeah,
And then second, that certain solutions won't work.
yeah,
And then third, what I try to do is offer sort of like a framework for possibility.
yeah.
And I want to suggest that we can now fill in that framework in different ways, but that it's the framework for possibility.
The
So
frameworks, like I'm so excited about that because I need a way forward, and I think that the framework can be helpful. Yeah,
yeah. So I think the problem is kind of deepened in my mind. I think I didn't really appreciate the problem when I was taking courses in graduate school, and people would sort of ask, like, how can mind produce changes to material states? Like, how is that even possible?
yeah,
And they would just ask that question like with force. Like, well, I have no intuition that there's a problem there. I mean, anything can cause anything. I don't see what you're seeing, like why that's a problem.
yeah.
Um, but it's interesting because I did I did get the grip of the hard problem of consciousness. Now, not immediately, but as I zoomed in on kind of what these philosophers were saying, what Chalmers was saying, and increasingly even in the writing of the book, just looking at the specific kinds of states of consciousness and then thinking about how just moving particles around could produce those states all on
Yeah.
their own, could explain those states. I did find myself thinking, yeah, I think it's not just that I don't see how this is possible. I think I actually see that there are some impossibilities here. Like there are some constraints on what can happen. And we talked about this.
Yeah.
I always like to use example like numbers can't produce people because I think most people can have a pretty firm grip on that impossibility.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying everything sort of is easy to see as everything else. But I think that there's some constraints you can sort of see. And so then I'm thinking about different theories about the nature of mental states and different theories about the nature of material states. And it's looking to me that on certain theories, they just don't seem like they can interact. And what helped me here is that I started to see that there is a connection between mind body problem and that hard problem of consciousness. Because if you think that the brain functions in a certain way to produce thoughts and feelings and emotions and conscious intentions, then in a way, you already think that there's a solution to that hard problem if the
Mm.
brain is fundamentally mindless molecules.
Yeah.
There has to be some kind of solution there. And I've had this idea that, well, what do I want to say here? Before I get to the idea, let me kind of draw out that problem just a little bit. So
Yeah.
so I think there's maybe a kind of nature problem that certain. It's not just that they're different. It's that certain kinds of things don't seem to be able to produce certain other kinds of things. Like numbers can't produce leaves. And so, that just seems true. And a mental character in my mind can't just produce rocks rolling out of my mind. It's just that doesn't work. There's just like incongruence there.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, well, then how does mind and matter, how do they relate? And some people think, well, maybe you're assuming dualism, right? You're assuming mind is not material. But that's not really what I'm trying to think about here. I'm just trying to think about, okay, what are thoughts from my own first person introspective analysis? They have a structure, they have aboutness. How can this thing that I witnessed directly in my own mind, this isn't a spooky woo woo posit. This is something that I witnessed directly in my own mind. And there's an intention to, let's say, count to 5 with my fingers. 1, 2, 3. Oh, look at matter is moving, right? Matter. These are shapes changing. 1, 2. I have
Yeah.
this intention in my mind. I'm focusing on the attention. I'm witnessing its reality. Okay, I'm not positing some immaterial thing here. I'm not positing anything. I'm directly, consciously witnessing its reality and then witnessing this result.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not sure, like, how is that really possible right away? In the book, I distinguish between two puzzles. One is a kind of specific linking question, which is like, how do specific thoughts link to specific effects, especially if mindless matter is pulling the strings on everything?
Yeah.
How does the mind add its own causal power to make it, or does it? Is it just like, it's just almost like a coincidence that mindless matter just happens to produce the effects that, like, I'm seeing that I'm intending to produce? It's like,
Right.
I have this specific intention that has a specific structure, content, that I count to 5. And then there's this event in material reality that has that same structure, counting to 5. And there's this specific link. And it's like magic, right? How does that work?
Yeah.
I think empirical science can help us, and has helped us a lot to fill in those details. But there's still this kind of deeper question about, like, what kind of reality would make it probable that there would be these kinds of matches, these kinds of links. That's a specific linking question. Then there's this, I call it the general linking question, which is even more fundamental, which is about the nature of the mental and the nature of the material effect. And it's about how can there be this transition from this mental state to this material effect. And I'm telling you, like, I came into the grip of that problem. Like, I no longer think that that's just, like, well, anything can cause anything. I really came to feel like, no, you know what? There can't be a direct causation there. It's actually just not possible. Just not possible for there to be a direct causation in either direction. Just the natures are wrong. And so then, I mean, this led me to think hard and even pray. I was like, God help, I want to understand. And so through reflection, I came up with a framework of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say, here's an idea that doesn't seem impossible to me, and it seems like it would at least allow this mind matter to possibly go together. And the framework of possibilities introduced this notion of a substance. And I'm kind of thinking of this in an Aristotelian way, but I try to be minimal in my characterization of it. But it's basically something that can have some form or some attributes. Okay, it's not itself an attribute, it's not itself just an abstract state, but it's something that can be a bearer of attributes. And then I make the argument that this is the kind of thing that could have basic capacities. Basic capacities would be powers to do certain things, not in virtue of doing other things. So some things you do in virtue of doing other things, but a basic capacity you just do in a basic way.
Okay.
And I make the argument that some capacities have to be basic, because otherwise you have an infinite regress problem where anything that anything does, it does in virtue of doing something else first, but does that in virtue of doing something else first. And it's not first in time. It's like at this moment, like you do this in virtue of doing this in virtue out to infinity. That's doing too much. So, to avoid that problem, I say I float the possibility here that there's some basic powers, basic actions, right?
Yeah.
So then that opens up the door, because then the question is, what are these basic actions? And I make the argument through other parts of the book that among the basic actions are the actions to make or to form in one's mind thoughts. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that there can't be prior conditions or constraints. It's not that you can just like think anything at any time. I think there are prior conditions and constraints.
Okay.
But it's what it is, because like maybe you have to have a certain set of experiences to have a certain set of thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay?
You never seen an elephant, then you can't make a pink one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But once you've met the right conditions, then it opens up the possibility of forming a thought without first having to do an infinite number of other things, right? Or any other things. You just form the thought. And so then I have 7 drawers of a theory. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I go carefully and systematically through each drawer to show how you can have thoughts, you can cause motions, you can cause visual experiences of space, you can cause links between thoughts and visual experiences, you can cause programs over time. And actually, I think evolution through natural selection contributes to the development of programs and interacting with your environment. And I draw on some evolutionary biologists in this respect. And it fits very well with my own theory of consciousness. So that actually the conscious being is able to generate, in a way, its basic actions are out of a substance that can produce states, and then through the generation of states, it can now produce more elaborate, complex programs that link some states with other states.
Yeah, like throwing a baseball or something like that. Like
Yeah,
that's
that's a
yeah.
complex. Or building, like building a neighborhood. You have to build each house, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
how
yeah.
you build a house, you got to build, and so I'm trying to analyze this at the most fundamental level, the basic actions, and then I leave open, like what all is involved. I mean, is it
Sure.
just one substance? Well, maybe many substances cooperate. Maybe there's many different stuff. Maybe there's a foundational substance. We can open up that door too. But the idea here is that there's got to be some basic capacities, and so it's not that merely by having a feeling, that structure of that feeling thereby makes an arm move, or merely by changing the shape in some particles, that makes those particles have happiness.
Hmm.
That causation is not direct. What's going on is that there's a certain kind of being, that when that being is present, there can now be the production from that being, the different states, and it can link the states together. And this is a skeleton that can then be filled in, but it allows for the possibility of mind-body interaction in terms of a unifying substance. And it also has a very practical implication, because it implies that in order for a brain to be connected to consciousness, there has to already be a certain kind of substance. I call it a conscious substance.
Yeah.
Kind of substance that can do this sort of thing. And so there has to be that kind of substance. Without the substance, the brain would never on its own become conscious. I think this actually poses an in principle problem for building conscious beings just out of chips. I think if you assembled a robot that became conscious, it would be because it taps into some
Yes.
super law
Yeah.
that's connected to the production of a conscious being, or the whether the production of a conscious being, or the translation, to use a more neutral term, of a conscious being into a certain place.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's happening there is that the conscious being is required for there to be interaction at all
Yeah.
with material structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that. Oh, man, I really like that.
So I'm not so confident like about each of those parts,
Yeah.
but I am
Yeah.
pretty confident that there is a problem here, and solving has not been easy for me.
Yeah.
But I do offer a theory that I think has helped me, at least. So,
Yeah. And I like that. I wonder about so there's a power. Shoot. You said you could leave it open to whether there's, one substance or several.
yeah.
Um so the conscious subject or the conscious substance, is there any reason to think that it is one? Because I think, like, intuitively we're like, no, I am me. I'm not 10 substances or something.
Yeah.
I don't think it would matter, because then you would have, like, you could just say substance pluralism instead of substance dualism or something.
Yeah.
But any intuitions that you have, or whether you think that we just are that one that has all the capacities, or whether each capacity has its own substance or something?
So I do have this whole section on oneness,
Shoot. Yeah,
and I
get to
give an
that.
account of my oneness. And so, I do think I'm one being.
Yeah.
But there could be other beings. Well, okay. I mean, look, so you're a different being. I'm a being, you're a being, okay? And we're interacting. And the interaction I'm having with you is affecting me, including like my brain. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the development of my brain is not solely just because of me.
Oh, that's good, dude. There's
Yeah.
2 substances affecting your brain. At least 2
Yeah.
substances if we
Yeah.
are that's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
One directly and one maybe more indirectly, right?
Yeah. That's right. And it could be that in the history of my total life, um, I'm not the only substance that developed my brain.
Sure.
And even here, when I say I developed my brain, it's a little bit on purpose, because there is this view that the brain is what develops the consciousness and the sense of self.
Mm,
I'm quite convinced I just have the opposite view of that's actually the conscious being
yeah.
that develops its form.
I'm with you there. Yeah,
Fundamental.
totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you prayed about this, and so maybe the, God substance also
Well,
carried you along and helped you as well.
help me. Yeah. Yeah. That right. So God could be at work at the foundational level,
Yeah.
and I don't want to suggest that my answer here came out of prayer. I prayed and then I worked this through, but I didn't have the feeling that God
Sure.
gave me
Sure.
this theory, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So otherwise, yeah.
Which
can get
isn't to
hairy.
say that there aren't other times, because there actually are some pieces of that counting argument where it did feel like God was giving me information, and I'm not 100% certain of that, but it had that feeling. So
Yeah,
I don't rule that out.
that's
Yeah,
awesome. All right. So I just want to finish with two questions, man, just to sum this all up.
this is great. Yeah, this is
So
wonderful. Thank you.
what are we? And then what must reality be like in order for us to be what we are?
Okay, I want to
Simple.
address those questions. Those are the big questions, and then I know we're taking good time on this.
Yeah.
I think it'll be helpful just to say a little bit more about the science, the
Do it.
neuroscience. So I
Yeah, for
want to
sure.
come back to that. But yeah, so I mean, my basic theory about who we are is, one level of answering that is that we are fundamentally the kind of being that we witness introspectively when we witness that most familiar self. And you almost have to get into a meditative state, I think, to
Hmm.
sort of realize that, okay, you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, you're not your emotions. There's something aware of your thoughts and feelings, or something aware of your emotions. What is that? And then you turn the awareness in on it. And then what is that? Well, I say that's real. It is actually who you are.
Mm.
Um, but it's such a profound reality that it's actually connected to the second question, which is how could you come to be? What kind of stuff could make you?
Yeah.
And this part just blows my mind. And I'm still trying to work through um, how to understand this more precisely. In the book, I lay out this tight constraint of where the answer is. And in that little place is some room there that I'm trying to understand more. But there's that deep construction problem of how do you produce a self? It's so deep. I mean, just thinking about it, like, how do you come to be? And the theory that I ended up developing is a source substance theory, that you are in a significant way constructed out of the fundamental self,
Mm.
the original reality, the most basic reality. And by the way, going back to that very first puzzle, like, well, how can there be consciousness? Consciousness is a state. A state is not a substance.
Yeah.
So I think that the explanation of consciousness is this fundamental self.
Hmm.
This fundamental self has these powers, these basic powers to produce thoughts and feelings. It's wild to me to think about how it has those powers. But at some level, there's just this basicality, this sort of, maybe there's a kind of, I've wondered, sort of connecting with some of my other work, if you sort of shave off all sort of arbitrary complexities and limits and boundaries, like what you're left is with an unrestricted, unconstrained, sort of like inexhaustibly powerful fundamental reality. And if that
Yeah.
fundamental reality is a self, then it can be the thing out of which all other persons are made. And I use that term "are made" because kind of my working model here is that I'm not just created like ex nihilo, like fresh material. Like, I'm
Yeah.
literally made out of the original self. Like, when I look within, I see myself. I'm seeing all the way into the depths of reality. I'm
Hmm.
seeing into the basic point of reality that is the same point that's in you. So, like, there's this deep way in which, on this model, we're all united by this deep self. The fundamental
Yeah.
self unites us. We're all one in that sense. Like, if you get mad at me, you're actually literally mad, and you start putting negative energy toward me, and I start to feel that your energy that's negative toward me, insofar as it touches the center point of me, it has to touch the center point of you, because the center point of you is the center point of me.
Hmm.
I'm not saying you are me.
Yeah.
I'm saying your center point, the deepest point of you is the deepest point of me. I lose my language to even talk about this, because I do
Yeah.
think there's distinction between persons, but um, this is how I end up addressing that deep construction problem,
Yeah.
is that there's this original fundamental reality, and it is able to make other things. And maybe in our traditions we have metaphors for this that are always like incomplete, sort of like training wheels. They don't really get to the deeper thing that's going on there, but I think we can continue to learn more and more
Yeah.
about the fundamental nature of reality. So where I'm at is that who I am is a first person reality. Fundamentally, I witness myself within. And then my origin is deeply connected to your origin. And it's deeply connected even to what I am, the stuff of my existence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. But, like I say, these are deep waters,
Yeah.
and I'm still sorting my own thoughts about how to understand sort of the unity of that fundamental self and then the diversity of the persons and their experiences.
Yeah. So, man, when I was reading this at the gym on the elliptical today, and then I went and I was doing bicep curls. I remember where this was at, and I looked around and I saw all these people around me, and I thought, like, and I think I was actually listening to you and Goff as well. So I read a little bit, then I listened to you and Goff, and Goff, Philip Goff, for those who don't know, he had this paper on universal consciousness where like there's it's priority monism. So the universe is conscious, and then we're all made of like parts of that, still connected to it, but we have our own conscious properties, our own phenomenological properties, so that you and I have different minds. And then he dropped that, and I was like, man, that's actually really fascinating. I wish you'd stick with that. But
Mhm.
when you kind of brought it home for me, where I was thinking of like, what does it mean to be the image of God? And it's like, if God is this fundamental reality and He is conscious and He's made us in His image,
Yeah.
what would that have to be like? What would that be like? And if He like breathed into us, we have this language in the Bible about that. But if He did, and we were like part of Him, but in a way where we could still respect the creator creature distinction, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a really important thing. If we can do that, like how much more valuable are you and me? Like, it's not just this language that, oh, I'm gonna say that you're made in my image. It's like, no, you are of the same like thing as me, you're not God,
Yeah.
but you represent me. And then how terrible is that when I don't represent him well,
Hmm.
and so it's just it freaked me out. I looked around and I see all
Yeah.
these image bearers of God, and I was like, the value and worth in this building right now is insane. And yet
Yeah.
we all have these different lives and experiences that have shaped us in different ways, and I can't think the way they can, but I can if they speak to me and share their thoughts with me. So it was crazy to have
I've
this
had
weird
similar
experience.
experiences, and at the gym where I'm like looking at other people and
Yeah.
thinking about this and thinking like, wow, we're so deeply connected
Yeah.
by this sort of common substance, and
Yeah.
and I like how you put that in terms of the image bearer,
Yeah.
the sort of icon or person or face of the original reality representation of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Whew, man, it's deep, it's heavy.
I
Yeah.
know we're
Well,
at the end. I did want to just say
science. Yeah,
kind of one
science.
thing about the science,
Please.
and this is always like a very tricky and delicate topic because first it's complex. Second, I'm not a neuroscientist, right? So I'm reading 2020, 2021 articles, reading abstracts, reading the peer review data in the article, reading what they're saying. And it looks to me like there's just this flood of new information about how consciousness is affecting brain states in measurable ways.
Hmm.
Um, there is work about how you can, in a sense, like fix your brain through certain mindful meditation techniques and
Yeah.
repair your brain. Um, and this isn't like fringe science or
No.
um, like cherry picking. This is like mainstream developments about the power of our consciousness. And I think one of the big questions is how do we analyze what the scientists are finding about
Yeah.
the conscious impact on materials? How do we analyze that? And I think that really to make progress on this, we do need to sort of make distinctions, do that sort of analytical surgery. Um, Smart people come to different views on this because it's not easy to see how to analyze this.
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of just make this point because there is a kind of narrative or paradigm that says that it's part of what science has discovered that everything is actually determined by the micro mindless physical processes.
Right.
And it looks to me that there's a kind of maybe revolution going on now, but it's hard to know what to make of it.
Yeah.
My own analysis is that our consciousness is able to affect material systems. I used to use the language of top down. I think it's actually better to use the language of bottom up. When Carlo Rovelli talks about the quantum field having these informational states that are prior to the spatial projections of matter, material
Yeah.
form, and that there are these vibrational states, these excitations in the quantum field that then propagate outward into macroscopic structures. It's like I'm thinking, okay, well, there is this quantum brain theory. This is recent stuff where they're talking about how we can measure consciousness, and that this could actually happen through propagation upward through the quantum field. This makes sense of the data. Now, this is an indirect inference. So I'm starting with observations of my own mental experiences, having effects in the world, together with reading the science that kind of opens up this possibility that that we're actually able, we're deep in. It's not that the molecules formed a brain and then God stuffed the person in there.
Yeah.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
or the person just popped out like magically. It's that, no. We're, in a sense, when I was born onto the earth, my consciousness preceded even the material forms, and I began to contribute to the generation according to informational codes
Yes.
that are, let's say, in cooperation with God.
Yeah.
The development of my neurological structure so I can interact with this world.
Yeah. So there's some substance dualists. I don't know if I'm always wary to say who says what, but Brandon Rickabah has toyed with this idea. I think JP Moreland has toyed with it too. But like the soul informing the body, and it's like what you're saying, like informing, not in like the old metaphysic way, but like shaping and giving rise to and organizing. Because you look at
being
you look
causally
at
prior to.
exactly right, and building up. It's something's doing it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
What
And
do you?
I love how you, I just add this here, because I love about how you would say earlier that we have a kind of access to our own consciousness that's like greater, more familiar than our access to external material world. And I think that there's something here about our own access to our own powers to make changes, including to make changes in structures in our own imagination, in our own mind, that we're actually more familiar with that than we are of microphysical states producing all the effects, right? So it seems like, given that what's clear is my witnessing of my own mental causation, to me that seems clear. It seems like then I want to build my worldview on what's clear, not what's less clear. This fits with what scientists are saying as well. So that's another reason why I sort of arrive at this view that, it's like your consciousness forms the changes in your body, and it's two-way. There's two-way interaction. I do believe that.
I like that. I actually like you wanting to reclaim the bottom up, because it makes sense of what you're saying here. Well, we're gonna have to change the thought bubbles. We're gonna take those thought bubbles and put them underneath this. We're standing on the thought bubble or something. But we always have this idea of like, oh, I'm going up there to think, and it's like, nah, that's like the emergentist view. Like we don't have to go in for that.
Well, this is actually very important in terms of framing, because for philosophers, we think of the fundamental things as down.
Yeah.
So, like if you want to talk about God and
Grounding,
you're a philosopher,
right? Yeah, you're grounded in.
don't never point up to God.
Yeah.
Because if you're a philosopher, just point down, because philosophers think the fundamental things are down. Right. So there's this weirdness with the top down, because it mixes things in our minds. It confuses us. It's like we think, well, top down causation, novel powers that go down. But wait a minute, those powers are supposed to be able to do something that's not predicted by the microphysical, which means that in a way, they're fundamental actors. I mean, this is actually what Papineau, he has this article called The Rise of Physicalism. He makes this beautiful argument from the sort of mental powers to this idea that if those mental powers are real and not reducible to the mindless, that they would actually make a difference to the microphysical. Now, his argument kind of goes the other way. He says, well, the microphysical explains everything, so there aren't these mental powers. But I flip it and say, no, if there are these mental powers, what that means is that they do make a difference to the physical in a sort of fundamental way, which means if the fundamental is down, then, maybe it's better to kind of reconfigure this and sort of think of, because the reason why people use the word top is they're thinking of the whole, the mereological whole, as being the big. And so the top is like from the big down to the small. But if you can sort of think about it actually, like you, whatever you are fundamental. And so you act sort of bottom up.
Yeah.
I think that's just helpful. That's
well, I love it. I've been thinking about this since I had Dr. Schaffer on and talking about priority monism, and I'm like, why does it have to be up here? Why isn't priority monism down here? Like, just the spatial stuff helps me think through that.
Yeah, how we think about it. Yeah,
that's good, man. This has been huge. So we covered like barely any of the book. There's so much that you go over. There's so many things where I'm like, there's an argument. It's so good. So again, for the listeners, the book's not out yet, but maybe when you're watching this, it is. And if it is, I'll put the link in the description. But it's Who Are You Really? A Philosopher's Inquiry into the Nature and Origin of Persons. And Josh, man, thanks for forwarding it over. Like, I love it. I'm gonna have to read it over several more times, but it's already helped me think through this stuff. And I want to be a philosopher of mind. So this is awesome, man. I'm really appreciative of your
Thank
work
you.
here.
Yeah, I appreciate this time with you, and I feel like we really drew out a lot in this conversation. So I'm very grateful for that. I mean, we drew out some stuff that's not exactly in the book, some of the things that we
That's
talked
good.
about here.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there's more. The book is. I try to write in that sort of wide appeal style,
Yeah.
sort of like in the How Reason Can Lead to God. But I was telling my wife Rachel, I was like, this book is actually really intense.
Yeah.
It's maybe about almost twice as intense as How Reason Can Lead to God, and about almost twice as long.
Yeah.
But it kind of needs to be intense given the nature of the inquiry that we're talking about. So
Well, I was actually laughing when I was reading it because it reminded me so much of Swinburne's "Are We Bodies or Souls?" Where at the beginning he's like, "I'm writing to a general audience," and it's small. So I'm like, "Sick! This is gonna be great." And I was a theology student at the time, and it was like, "This is not no. We're talking about informative designators and stuff," but it was such a way that I could still get in. It wasn't so
yeah,
jargon laden that I couldn't get in. And yours is like that, where like
yeah,
I've been studying this stuff, so it's helpful that I have a lot of those things, but if you stick with it, you will learn. Like you can do it, and especially with the tools that you've given. So it's really good because it's not popular level, even though
yeah.
someone who's not a expert can read it.
That's right. You can work through it, and there's always a difference between the sort of the highlights.
Yeah.
I try to sort of write in that layered way. You can kind of skim and skip to get the highlights,
Yeah.
and then the depth, because I did want to write this so that specialists could get something new. I mean, there were some things I thought, oh, this could help, and I have people in my mind like this could help sort that out, So
That's so good.
yeah,
So good. Josh, so people want to listen to more of you, man. Can you plug your YouTube channel for them?
worldview design,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to coming back to that at some point to produce more content. But I have
Yeah.
some videos there,
Yeah.
and joshualrasmussen.com. You can have the links there here, but
Yeah.
there you can get a lot of free resources to help you go deeper. Yeah.
Awesome. And is that How to Build a Thought? Do you have that at the website, or where can someone find that
You
one?
should be able to find that, yeah, on my website, how to
Cool.
build it. Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, folks. Well, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.